Okay, so here we are after the break with our next speaker and our dear friend Miljan Bajić. Miljan is recognized as an expert in Agile. He's one of the roughly 50 people and professionals in the world that both holds Certified Enterprise Coach and Certified Scrum Trainer credentials by Scrum Alliance. He's an Agile coach, trainer, facilitator, and consultant, and he has more than 50 years experience as an organizational change leader. He gave support to several organizations in their Agile and Lean transformation journey. Miljan is here with us. So hi Miljan and welcome.
Hi Elena, nice to see you. And,
how are you? I heard you're in Belgrade. I'm sorry that the weather is not better.
Yeah, but, hopefully we can, I'm in Belgrade currently, and hopefully we can catch up later today. I was hoping, obviously, to be here in person, but it's great at least to do it this way. But it is a little weird that we're all here in Belgrade.
Yes.
But Marco even asked me if I wanted to come into the office. I felt like I'll do it from somewhere that, you know, there's a little, maybe less noise and I'm a little more comfortable. But I'm excited to share some of the things with the community here. This is my first time presenting some of this information, so it'll be interesting as far as what people see as takeaways or questions that they might have.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. If you want, you can, some of the speakers did that, but after your session, you can upload some of the takeaways if you want, or a presentation or everything that you want to share on Matchabout, so that our audience can see it, download it, and keep it for their future reference. Okay, so today you're here with us on the topic of Agile to Agility.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll share my screen here.
Okay. Before you start, I just want to remind our audience that they can use Q&A session to ask Miljan any question, and approximately, Miljan, like 10 minutes before the end of the session, right? We will see the list of the question and try to answer as many as we can. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
We are ready,
also, for if anybody wants to, the presentation that I'm sharing and also the link to the podcast on YouTube is in the Q&A section. So if you go to ask a question there, you'll see those two links. They're not very well formatted, but at least you can get those. That will be the link that I'll share later on as well. So let me share the presentation here. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Yelena, can you see it okay?
Yeah, okay. We can see the screen.
So some of you might be familiar with Mural and some of these tools. I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm just going to go through this Mural with some of the ideas, essentially, of what I think is, you know, this movement from Agile to Agility. So maybe just to give you a little background, I started writing a book a couple of years ago, and while COVID, we were moving from Sacramento to San Diego, and I hit like a writer's block. I couldn't write anything. It was just, so I started a podcast to compensate for the time that I couldn't write. I just wanted to do something else. So I called it Agile to Agility. Yeah. Šta je what's oh, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. You see all this stuff. Yeah, that's okay. But hopefully it's big enough. Yeah, I can see it actually here. So yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So that's kind of how or how I came to the idea of Agile to Agility. So we'll explore this. What is Agile and agility, and this kind of movement, or hopefully, you know, some of the things that are changing. So maybe before we dive into some of the content, I wanted to share with you maybe this idea of doing Agile and being Agile, because doing Agile is a lot of time associated, and it is simplified with the big A, and agility, which is the goal, is a lot of times associated with being Agile. In reality, we need both. So we need to do Agile and be Agile. So a lot of times, you know, we talk about in the context of, you know, Agile Manifesto started this kind of or frame this movement. So how do we look at values and principles, or maybe mindset and culture, versus how do we look at frameworks like Scrum and practices, maybe like daily or whatever. Of, hide, only show what you need to show. And then the frameworks like Scrum layered on top of that traditional type of culture. So, in a sense, we need to focus both on changing the culture and mindset, as well as changing or adopting the practices. Another way to look at it, if we look at this is actually part from a book that I'm writing, and if you're familiar with Integral, of some of the presentations that I've done in the past, we can look at agile, or this concept of being agile, on the left side, where we look at the mindset and culture. So like, do we have leaders that are just thinking about the company and not the people? Do we have the culture that's, inclusive and that it focuses on people and, what we consider agile culture? Versus, are we just focused on changing the practices? A lot of organizations that I go into it, they just want to do Scrum or dive into the Scrum framework or whatever prescriptive framework they might be adopting. Or they might be thinking about changing the organizational structures, moving from functions to products or whatever it is. So this concept of doing agile on the right side here, actions, behaviors, practices, and systems would include architecture, policies like HR. Do we have annual reviews, or do we have, more rapid feedback loops or feedback for employees? The last 10 years have been really focused on the right side. If you think about how agile and what we've done, like, these are the things that we can measure. So Scrum framework, SAFe would be on this side. We talk about changing the culture and mindset, but when I go into organizations, they're mostly focusing on behaviors, actions, and systems, but not really even understanding how to change the culture or mindset, especially at the leadership level. So when I started the podcast, I've interviewed over 50 people right now. I've interviewed people like Dave Snowden, Mike Cohn, Dean Leffingwell, Jorgen, Roman Pilcher. I mean, like the biggest names in Agile. And I've tried to summarize some of the things that stood out for me from these interviews. I shared the link in the chat, but you can also check out the podcast on YouTube. You can just search for Agile to Agility, or just youtube.com/C/Agile to Agility, and you can see the full interviews there. But what I would like to share with you today is this move from being or doing agile to being agile, and actually looking at it holistically, because I think speaking to many of these thought leaders, I think the next probably 5 to 10 years will be kind of focused on all of these. So, a lot of people call it, holistic agile and integral agile, but it's focusing on all of these, not just the right side. So I'll start with Dave Snowden. One of the things one of the quotes that I took from my conversation with Dave is that there is a paradigm shift. So if for those of you that have heard Dave, one of the things that he's, always interesting about, he tries to kind of push the limits in many things, including, some of the silly agile stuff that we're doing. And this is, I think, one of them, but I think there's a lot more consensus in agile community around this. So he said agile as a movement is coming to an end of its life cycle. So that's a pretty big, sense. So I think a lot of people can sense that there's something coming, or that the agile as we know it is not working. I know that in 90% of organizations that I go with, they call agile, or that they doing agile, but it's nowhere close to what we all know takes for organizations to be resilient, for organizations to have people that are engaged and happy. So I wanted to maybe share with you, if anybody's familiar with Thomas Kuhn's cycle. This is the guy that came up with the term paradigm. And he talked about how each paradigm goes through a cycle. So, if we take a look at waterfall was normal science, or what would be called in Kuhn's cycle normal science, for many decades. The model that normal science of waterfall started drifting probably in the late, I don't know, 80s, definitely in the early 90s, definitely by the 2000s. We had, Scrum XP, Agile Manifesto was written. So there was a model drift from that traditional waterfall. What we've seen recently is this kind of craziness with these, what I call recipe frameworks. So safe, I would put less in it, Scrum at scale. It was all about, last 10 years was all about doing agile. And I think what we're seeing here is experiencing the model crisis. We know that safe, if you've been part of safe, if you've been part of a lot of these, that none of these frameworks by themselves, they're good recipes, but if you don't have all the ingredients for the recipe, then they don't work. You have to contextualize them with what you have. So what we're seeing is there's a model evolution and revelation, I guess, in a sense that we're realizing that we can't follow any of these frameworks by the book. We need to take a look at holistic, both doing agile and being agile approaches. And what we're also realizing, if you look at some of the stuff that Mike Spade is doing, that some of the stuff that some of the thought leaders are doing, we're moving into a space where there are no specific frameworks. And we're kind of going back to the patterns and understanding the context and applying the right patterns in that context. So what I think we'll see more and more is less reliance on these frameworks. And again, it probably won't go away anytime soon, but we'll see. And what people that I've talked to from my own experience is that we'll move away from these prescriptive frameworks slowly over the next probably 10 years, 10 years, and more into context specifics. To give you an example, Spotify is a great example of how they didn't adopt any of this stuff. They created a framework, or continuously keep evolving that framework based on the context. So for a lot of organizations, in order for them to succeed, they'll kind of have to adjust their approaches and their frameworks and develop a lot of what I call internal cooks and chefs in order to create frameworks and approaches that are specific to their companies. So that's the first one that kind of sets the context for a lot of other things that I'm going to talk about here. The second person, and I didn't interview them in this order, is Evan Lamburn from Business Agility Institute. And his key message is organizations will have to develop this ability to respond. So one of the things that I took out from my interview with him that I found interesting is that he said there's no normal. There's never been normal. Your company is going to be disrupted. COVID just disrupted everyone at the same time. That's the only difference. Your company is going to be disrupted again in the next 10 years. I don't know where, I don't know how. You don't know where, and you don't know how. All you know is that you have or need to have the ability to respond, not react, to respond to whatever the future brings, and that's business agility. So I think this kind of leads into the next interview that I had with Jürgen Appello, where survival is optional. So Evan up here, based on a lot of research that they're getting and experiencing through Business Agility Institute and some things that they're doing, they define a business agility as that ability to respond, not react. So for organizations that are not able to do that, to piggyback of that, is survival is not mandatory. And this is a quote from Jorgen: "Survival is not mandatory, as they say. I don't care if some organizations don't make it and die in the next decade. Whatever, people will survive. They will find other jobs that better run companies, and everyone will be happier. Yes, it will be slightly stressful for some having to find other job. So what? There's just another tiny crisis to overcome." So hopefully you're getting a team here. Dave Snowden is saying that we're, probably at the end of the agile, or towards the end of and that could be next 5, next 10, next 2 years. But the agile movement as we know it is slowly shifting. That new paradigm is emerging. Companies, doesn't matter what framework or what we call it. I mean, when I spoke with Mike Cohn, he said, like, I wish I live to see a day where we don't call things agile or Scrum or anything like that. That's just the way that we do things. So from this ability to respond, and if you are not essentially that ability or that agility, if your organization doesn't have that business agility, it'll probably fade away. As you know, a lot of companies, the life cycle or the lifespan of a company is getting shorter and shorter. So that survival is optional. I joke around, only the government agencies probably can escape this a little bit longer than anybody else, because the pressure for them is different than what it is for publicly traded companies. So from there, looking at, well, what needs to be done, and some of the other bigger changes when it comes to agility. I spoke with Rena Hellstorm about the role of HR. So it is apparent, even over the last 5 or so years, there's been more and more push towards how does HR need to evolve? How does HR need to support these organizational transformations, whatever you want to call them, and how do we learn? How do we compensate people? We had a great conversation. One of the things, though, that stood out to me is that she said, I would like, essentially, I would say there is no way we can centrally coordinate learning anymore. And just to give you a little bit more context around this, I was talking to her about a company in the United States, Fidelity, that works, and they give their employees 1 day a week, every week. And this is not the whole company. Most of the company, each product line allows, for flexibility. But most of the people at Fidelity today have Tuesdays dedicated to professional development. So imagine the commitment from a company where people get 1 day a week, every week, to focus on professional development. They can learn whatever they want. They can watch cat videos if they want. They don't have to report what they've learned, but the company is serious about saying, hey, we know that you need to learn, you need to develop yourself, you need to help organization become or stay innovative. So you figure out how you learn. I think that this is a huge trend, from an HR. I think another trend is, how does HR reinvent itself? There's a company in Boston called Vistaprint. If anybody's familiar with them, they've changed a lot, like what HR stands for, how HR supports other, product lines or services, and how they enable agility in organizations. So there's that. Without HR, without finance changing how it budgets, the chances of business agility are pretty slim. You can do agile, you can implement all of these frameworks and things like that, but if we're talking about business agility and ability to respond, you won't go far without HR and finance being involved. That, as I was putting this presentation together, that brought me to Johanna Routman. I had a great conversation with her as well, and this was something that I guess, didn't understand or wasn't fully aware of. But she said, how the way that we moved from incentivizing and working, because a lot of times when I talk to people that have been developers in 70s, 80s, they said, well, we used to be agile. We used to work in an agile ways. And over the years, we've kind of became more and more siloed, more and more responsible for our own piece of work. And how we measured efficiency was moved from almost a team to individual. And she said something that I want to share here. She said the big change came in 1985 and 86 when personal computer came up. And that's when managers thought for only $4,000 or $5,000, I can buy each developer his own or her own computer and really focus down on what developer needs to do. So we had this interesting focus on resource efficiency. A personal computer allowed each person to focus on their own work. So think about it, back in 70s, late 70s, 80s, people are working on a single computer, collaborating, working together to get a piece of functionality out. And then because we thought, let's just, same way that there's some type of dominant thinking that if we add more people, that will go faster, add more developers, just throw people at the problem. And so this efficiency, I think we're looking at, as a result of this, individual efficiency or performance, we had at some point where we're measuring how many lines of code somebody was writing. So I think what we'll see in the future is how do we define efficiency? How do we look at efficiency at both individual and team level? And what is efficiency really? Another thing that comes to that's, I guess, related to HR is how do we self-organize? How do we structure teams? If you're not familiar with Heidi Helfand's work, she's big on not having stable teams and having teams that are dynamic, that evolve and change. She calls it re-teaming. But ability for teams and organizations to allow and decentralize how teams organize and how they structure themselves. I have a client in around Boston that they have every quarter, they allow developers on teams to decide where they want to work and how they're going to cover and who's going to do what. So for instance, if you work on a dental product and you work with the dental product value stream and you want to work with another product line, you can actually switch the product lines or value streams. So in a sense, for the last 10 years, how we change, how we structure, resided with managers, resided with leaders, and team members didn't have a lot of say. I remember one client where there was this developer that became release manager and eventually, didn't do development for, 5-10 years. And when the restructure happened, just because of how kind of alignment of roles and things like that, they put him back as a developer, and this person didn't want to develop, and they had no say in what they wanted to do. So I think, the future is going to be where people on the teams have more say in, have more say in what they do, what teams they're on. So the quote that I got from Heidi that I thought was worth sharing with you is, it can be a superpower for a company to include people in reteaming or restructuring decisions of teams because the people are closest to the work. And another thing that's related to this is we talked, she said change is inventable. So develop that muscle. You might as well get good at it and lean into it. So if we look at the three here from Rena, Joanna, and Heidi, this is all about HR. This is all about people. This is all about how do we work and how do we decentralize? How do we get people that are more engaged at work? Because most of the people in Western countries, I'm assuming here as well, are disengaged at work, meaning that they don't give their companies, nowhere close to what they could be given. If we think people that come to the office that are adding value, well, we might be fooling ourselves. So from there, I'm going to switch over to kind of this section is about Scrum, Gunther, Daniel, and Christian. I'm assuming a lot of you are on Scrum teams, and this is really about the engagement, the mindset piece of our agile world, or the world that we live in. The conversation that I had with Gunther was a lot on Scrum, and one of the things that I always knew, but like he put it so well together. He says Scrum is more about the behavior than it is about process. The process aspect of Scrum is the mere beginning. And I teach as a CST, CC through Scrum Alliance. I teach a lot of classes, and most of the classes, we talk about values and principles, but most of the class is the exam. The CSM exam is mostly on the process aspect. So it made me think about how do I redesign my class to focus more on understanding that behavioral change, and how do you change the behavior? I was listening earlier, I don't remember which speaker it was, but they said like you can't change the people. People can only change themselves. So you can create environment. You can't really change their behavior unless you force it, and that won't be lasting, in the sense that as soon as you turn around, they'll go back to their habits. So think about in your organization, how much is the Scrum about the behavior? Like, do we have collective ownership of the work? Am I committing just for my own piece of work that I said I'm going to do, or am I committing as a team? How often do I mentor and teach others? Daniel Mezick, he's speaking today. If you never heard Daniel Mezick speak, I highly encourage you to check out some of his work. He's very entertaining as a speaker and trainer, coach. So when I spoke to him, he was, I believe, one of the first people that I interviewed. He said, how people misunderstand. So I'll read this quote from him as well. The number one thing that most folks either misunderstand or not emphasize enough is the link between success with bringing change to an organization and the engagement of people that are affected by the change. So without engagement, you have zero chance of being successful. And this is so true. Think about how many people in your organizations are engaged, and not just developers. And when I say developers, I mean from a Scrum perspective, anybody that's doing the work. How engaged are the people? Because year over year, the research indicates that most people, over 70% of people are disengaged at work. They're not giving their organizations 100% or nowhere close to it. So I think the focus is going to be, and it's been, probably for the last couple of years, 5 years, maybe even more and more, I see organizations truly look at how do we engage people? How do we focus on engaging people and not just telling them what to do? I think it's going to be, about how do we understand and how do we influence people's behaviors? And one of the other things that I learned from interviewing Christian Bayers, him and Peter Block did some type of analysis and survey or research document where they interviewed over 1,000 teams over 7-8 years. And based on their research, they came up with a lot of kind of patterns or things that that made up good teams, or what makes up a good team, agile team. That was the underlying question for the research. And one of the things that I want to share with you here is that this combination of ability for a team to deliver and what they call stakeholder concern or stakeholder understanding and involvement. So most teams, if they are delivering frequently and they have stakeholders involved in the process. So I said, this is kind of common sense. You want to deliver something to the customer, you want them to be involved, to provide feedback, and you want them to react as you iteratively, incrementally do that. And in a sense, they said, yeah, it's common sense, but how many people actually do that? How many people have engaged customers and stakeholders? How many people actually deliver frequently, right? So if your team can deliver frequently and get customers involved, those are the first two steps to having very successful agile teams. But they call these essentially cadences, or what do they? There are three important hygiene factors. They call them hygiene factors that need to support this. So they said the first one is you need to have those teams need to have autonomy. Again, no surprise. I think we talk about autonomy a lot. Continuous improvement. Obviously, that mindset and continuously, relentlessly improving, and management support. So if you don't have management support, if teams are not continuously improving and they don't have autonomy, it's very difficult, or you might not be able to sustain this delivering to the stakeholders and getting the stakeholders involved. But from their perspective, this is a recipe, in a sense, or pattern, maybe more of a pattern than a recipe, of what makes successful agile teams. And again, this is based over 7+ years of research, and they work with over 1,000, I think 1,200 teams. So this is a topic definitely that I plan to, or the research that I'm going to dive deeper into and try to understand some of the things. And they've actually published the raw data for this, so you can actually look at responses and everything. The last three that I want to share here with you are some of the things that you might be familiar with or understanding, but I think there's going to be more and more focus on this in the upcoming years. The conversation that I had with Jim Benson, again, another thought leader that's contributed. Probably, most people are not familiar how much Jim contributed to the Agile community and his work. But one of the things that I took out from my conversation with him is he said the biggest things that kill any company is they put barriers for people helping other people. So how easy is it in your organization to communicate and collaborate? I've had situations where companies create silos just for the sake of trying to implement some type of policy or whatever it is. But I think the focus will be on flow, and I think this is where the Kanban and there's a lot more understanding of flow and the importance of flow in the Kanban community than what I'm seeing, at least in the Scrum communities, and people that are kind of dogmatic about Scrum. Another thing that I see is, and has been, Scrum Alliance has been focusing on this over the last probably a decade, but I think more and more people are understanding the benefit of developing coaching skills. Scrum Alliance has even added it to the Scrum Master, Advanced Scrum Master, Certified Scrum Professional, learning objectives to understand these and develop these skills. Doesn't matter what role you play. I think coaching skills, being a better listener, asking better questions, not just jumping and telling people. And also organizations understanding the benefit of coaching. There was one situation where a client asked me to do professional coaching or help them with by coaching, and essentially, I remember this manager coming to me and saying, like, you're not helping out. You're not telling them what to do. You're just asking questions. You're engaged, but you're not telling them what they need to do. And there's this big misunderstanding between consulting, telling people and giving them your opinion, sharing your opinions and things that you think they should be doing, versus coaching. So I think there's more and more of this idea of developing internal coaches, understanding the benefit of coaching, not just for Scrum Masters, for all of the leaders in organizations. And lastly, my conversation with Dean Leffingwell was also really, a lot of people shed all over SAFe, complain about SAFe. I'm not a big fan of a SAFe as a framework. I've been in many organizations that implemented or tried to implement this. And again, if you don't contextualize it, most organizations. But I took out some of the things here. I took out 3 quotes from my conversation with Dean. The first one, he said, the problem is not that we don't know what we need to do now. The problem is execution. And I see that a lot, over the last 10 years we've developed, and I think a lot of people know what Scrum is. A lot of people know what needs to happen in order for our organizations to move from that agile to agility or business agility. But it's the execution. Not enough people, and there's not enough shared understanding in the company. Another quote that I took out from my conversation with him, in the end, it's about leadership, because most of us work in a system that we can't change. Only the leaders or managers can change the system. So if there was one thing that consistently stood out through all of these 50+ interviews, it's that the leadership or the senior executives in organizations are the ones that will need to help change the system. So you'll see more and more, boards, executives, like at the highest level in your company, learning and trying to understand how do we better move from this, agile is just for teams or managers, to like executives understanding how they need to support this change. Another thing that I thought that was interesting, Mike Cohn said something similar along these lines, and I said, you guys, or you can do this because you are the top leader in the organization. But Dean summarized it pretty well. He said, I would never again approach implementing agile or agile at scale without training the leaders first. And one of the things I teach leadership classes too, and a lot of times people that are coming to these classes are middle managers. And when I do teach executives like C-level, people that can truly make changes, they don't have a lot of time. They spend 100% plus of their time in meetings, so they don't have time to understand. They just want 20-minute version, 50-minute version of this. So the leaders, I think, in the future, or in order for these organizational changes to sustain and to truly for organization to have business agility, you'll see leaders that are more and more engaged in these and understanding these what needs to be done. So those are the some of the things that I took out, and maybe I thought in a summary I'll share with you like this, kind of in general, not necessarily just from these, and these are random and not necessarily specific order, but how we're gonna move, or some of the trends that will move from agile to agility. So I think you'll see with this move from frameworks as recipes, like look at SAFe, look at Scrum even. Most companies don't even have all the ingredients for Scrum, let alone some of these scaling frameworks. So we will see this move from frameworks as recipes to custom frameworks, like what you've seen with Spotify, and even people, call Spotify a framework or model. And again, they're just evolving their own recipe or creating their own recipe rather than following. You'll see this move from centralized learning to decentralized learning. Like I said, the need to continuously develop the way the technology and the skills that we need to learn are evolving and changing, that you won't see organizations as much focusing on training thousands of people through a same program, that it's going to be more of custom training. You'll see this move from essentially like product owners being business reps that don't fully understand software craftsmanship, to product owners having more authority and needing to understand IT. Like, for instance, as a product owner, I need to understand how I'm creating technical debt. It's not an IT problem. Technical debt is a business problem. You'll see this mindset move from me and ego, a lot of ego, to us mindset. And you've seen this. I mean, we've talked about. So a lot of this stuff it's not necessarily that it's starting, but that it's going to be more and more focused on this. You'll see that leadership, we're going to move from leadership imposing change, like everybody does Scrum, everybody does this, everybody uses this tool, to more of leadership co-creating changes with people and not just imposing changes. I think also what we'll see is this move from products and features to more of customer goals. So if you're familiar with jobs to be done, or understanding jobs that customers need to be done, true customer goals and solving customer problems, I think you'll see more and more of that. I think we'll see this idea of agility in IT to business agility. I mean, now I have clients in construction and manufacturing industries that are trying to apply and trying to have agility in their organization. So it's not about just agility in IT, it's business agility. Again, business agility has been around for, close to a decade, or that term, or focus on that. But I think this is going to, the next 5 years, 10 years is going to be actually how do we get good at business agility. Company focused, I think this is where you'll see that companies start realizing that it's not just about company, but it's people focused, and that people are your biggest resources, or maybe assets. Resources might not be a good term, but assets, or things to cherish. You'll see this move from rigid policies, like annual reviews and things like that, annual budgets, to more adaptive policies. And I think you'll see more and more shift from hiring people like myself and external consultants and coaches to developing internal consultants and coaches. So it's essentially not relying for other consultant coaches to tell us the recipe and come in and tell us what to do, but actually developing more and more internal coaches and consultants that can help us actually evolve things and contextualize things in our organization. So those are some of the shifts. Those are some of my learnings from those 50 plus interviews. I'll open it up. I don't know how much time we have.
This is the time that we used for the session, so not really time for a Q&A. Maybe I can squeeze in maybe 1 or 2 questions and
okay, and I can check out. A little bit. Yeah. And I'm more than happy to answer these questions and post them later.
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, that would be a good idea. Some speakers did that because a lot of questions are coming and we don't usually have enough time to answer all of them. So some of the speakers decide to later answer the question, any question. So can we start with the questions, or would you like to?
Yeah, I can take a look at them. Let me see here.
Oh, you can see them as well, right? Yeah. Or do you want me to read them to you?
I'm reading them right now.
Oh, okay, good.
So maybe what do you think about changing the culture? So changing the culture.
Just a second, Miljan. Before you start answering, can you just stop sharing the screen so that people can see you again?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I'll do. I'll just. Okay. Let me stop.
Oh, good. you're back with us.
So I think changing the culture, like you have to look at, how do you change the culture? Same way, how do you change the mindset? I think changing culture requires leadership that is willing to think and look at different ways. So for instance, if we talk about transparency, right? And we want to move from bureaucratic type of culture where we hide things, we only show, based on your level, what you see, to actually being more transparent. So that starts with leadership. That also starts with changing like your structure, or how do you actually become more transparent, having information easily accessible, more visible. So the culture, if you remember, if you go back to the 4 kind of quadrants that I talked about, the culture is changed by changing the mindset, changing the practices, and changing the systems. Or you can look at systems as organizational architecture, IT architecture. So think of culture as a result, rather. So you don't change the culture. You can only influence the culture by changing the mindset, changing how we work, how we deliver or solve customer problems. So that would be my short answer to that. But I've done several talks on this, so if you want, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and I can share or send you some more information on this.
Good, thank you. So as you can see, there are more questions. So as I said, you can answer them when you have time. Okay, Miljan, so thank you very much. You mentioned a lot of great people and great experts, and what can I say, you're lucky to have a chance to meet all of them and to talk all of them. And also our audience will have also opportunity to meet some of them later on, because some of them are our guests in panel and later on in their separate sessions. So thank you and see you later.
Thank you, yep, thank you. And yep, everybody feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Good, thanks. See you later,
you.
bye.
Yep, bye.